The automatic doors of Carson's department store whooshed open, spilling warm air into the gray morning. Thomas Halberg stepped inside, leaning slightly on his cane. His blazer, buttoned neatly despite the stiff wind outside, bore one decoration, a glinting silver star pinned over his heart. It hadn't seen daylight in years. His breath fogged lightly as he moved through the crowd, navigating between racks of coats and displays of early summer clearance. A pair of gloves, that was all he came for. Hal stood patiently in line, clutching his selection, a modest wool pair. Behind him, a young mother whispered something to her daughter, tugging the girl's hand gently to keep her still. Ahead, a teenage cashier chewed gum noisily, scanning barcodes in distracted rhythm. His gaze drifted over Hal, eyes narrowing as they landed on the metal. Without warning, the teen leaned forward. "You can't just wear that," he muttered, his voice low but sharp. Then, with two fingers, he flicked the metal. The sound, a tiny clink, seemed to echo louder than it should have. Hal instinctively reached up and steadied the lapel with his hand. His lips parted, but no words came out. Behind him, the little girl turned her head. Her mother gently pulled her gaze away. "Stolen valor," the cashier added, rolling his eyes. "My uncle got one of those." "You're not fooling anybody." Hal felt the heat rise in his neck. Still he said nothing, afraid his voice might betray him. He reached for his wallet with trembling fingers. No one intervened. Not the manager stocking ties 10 feet away. Not the shoppers who glanced and quickly looked back at their phones. The scanner beeped. A receipt printed. Hal nodded once, took his gloves, and walked out beneath the same automatic doors, metal askew, dignity trailing behind. He had spoken to no one, but the moment had spoken to him. Loudly. Snow had drifted thick over the Korean hills that winter, muffling gunfire but not screams. The cold bit into flesh like a second enemy, but Thomas Halberg didn't feel it anymore. Not really. Not after the 5th or 6th stretcher. Not after the 3rd or 4th dead friend. His fingers were raw, wrapped in tape and faith, but still he moved. Still he reached into blood and mud to pull men from where shrapnel had claimed them. It wasn't about courage then. It was survival measured in heartbeats. He'd been 21, green and terrified. The army had trained him to treat wounds but not to witness them in snow-covered ravines with mortars falling like judgment. He wasn't supposed to carry Private Wilcox through enemy fire, or drag Sergeant Klein back under a blanket of smoke, or stop Corporal Mendez from bleeding out using only gauze and a broken rifle strap. But he did. They all did what wasn't supposed to be possible. They told him later, after the firefight had died and silence spread like ash across the ridge, that his actions had saved 12 men that day. 12 who would go home. 12 who'd wake up decades later with wives, kids, mortgages. A field captain, eyes reddened and voice brittle, had pinned the silver star to Hal's torn fatigues while medics stitched his leg and morphine dulled the throb. For gallantry, he said, though it felt hollow to Hal. The men he'd left behind haunted him more than any commendation could ease. When the war ended, Hal didn't march in parades. He flew back quiet and limped into civilian life. There was no one waiting with signs. Just a bus ride and a stack of forms. He returned to Minnesota, buried the medal in a drawer, and took a job sweeping the hallways of a public school. It was work that didn't ask him to remember. He married a librarian named June, who never pressed for details but held his hand during night terrors. She'd braid her hair in the mornings while Hal drank coffee in silence, their routines weaving a kind of peace. They wanted children but were told it was unlikely. Hal never asked why. Some things felt like fate, and he had already spent his miracle ration in Korea. They lived simply. When June died from an illness that curled quietly into her lungs, Hal packed up her books, folded their wedding photo into his Bible, and returned to being alone. His younger brother, Danny, had enlisted a year after Hal. Danny had always chased his footsteps, tagging behind with boundless energy and wide-eyed admiration. "If you're a medic, I'll be infantry," Danny had joked, grinning on the day he shipped out to Vietnam. Hal never saw him again. They sent back a body, draped and broken. The folded flag still rested beside June's photo, the creases worn soft by decades of touch. In the years that followed, Hal rarely spoke of the war. He kept to his routine: early mornings, custodial shifts, long walks home. He was the quiet man at school assemblies, the one who fixed broken lockers and carried heavy boxes without being asked. Students liked him, in the way they liked comfortable silences and gentle nods. He never shared his past. When asked about the limp, he said he slipped on ice once. No one pressed. It wasn't until Elaine, his niece, commissioned into the army that something stirred again. She wore her uniform with the same sense of quiet dignity Hal once did. He didn't know how to speak to her about it, what he'd seen, what he'd done, what he wished he hadn't. Their conversations were short. Letters briefer still. She rose quickly in rank. He sent polite congratulations. Somewhere along the way, the war built a wall between them, not from malice, but from the weight of unspoken experience. Years passed. Friends faded. Even the school changed hands. Hal retired without fanfare, given a modest send-off and a plaque that now gathered dust beside his unused toaster oven. The days blurred together. He took to walking the neighborhood, feeding birds, and rereading old letters with fading ink. Then came Memorial Week. The news ran stories of local heroes, of veterans returning for reunions, of ceremonies held in rain-soaked cemeteries. Hal watched quietly. He thought of Mendez, who cried for his mother as Hal held his artery closed. He thought of Wilcox, who had written him one Christmas to say he'd named his son Thomas. He thought of Danny, forever 19 in a black and white photo. Something stirred. Not pride, Hal had never sought that, but a sense of responsibility. Silence had its place, but remembrance demanded form. So he opened the drawer, retrieved the box, and pinned the silver star to his blazer for the first time in half a century. He didn't expect applause. He didn't expect anything at all. He just wanted to remember. And maybe, in doing so, make someone else remember too. The morning he walked to Carson's department store, the sky was overcast. He moved slowly, coat buttoned, metal pinned. He felt foolish, a relic walking among the unaware. But still, he walked. All he needed was a pair of gloves. The others, the memories, the ghosts, the weight, followed quietly behind. The cold returned as Hal stepped out of Carson's, though the day itself wasn't particularly frigid. His hands, gloveless, curled stiffly as he adjusted the medal that now hung askew on his chest. The flick of the cashier's fingers still lingered, trivial in action, but corrosive in weight. He had lived a lifetime trying not to draw attention, yet one small glint of silver had made him a target in the fluorescent haze of a department store. And not a soul had intervened. He walked 2 blocks before realizing he still held the gloves in his hand. He hadn't bagged them. Hadn't even checked the receipt. Did they charge him? Did it matter? He almost turned back but kept walking. Let them keep the money, he thought. Or the gloves. Or the shame. Let them hold something for once. The sidewalk blurred into the familiar gray of the neighborhood. A bus screeched nearby. Teenagers laughed across the street, the shrill notes of mockery woven into the air like threads of smoke. Hal wasn't sure if it was aimed at him or just another performance of indifference. He didn't look. His medal shifted again with each step. When he reached his home, a modest brick structure with peeling paint and a stubborn front gate, he paused at the door. His key trembled in the lock. Inside, the walls felt smaller, the quiet tighter. He set the gloves down on the counter and stared at them, unsure whether he wanted to use them or bury them with the medal again. He made tea, hands shaking as the kettle shrieked. On the windowsill sat a small frame, June smiling on their honeymoon, her braid undone, wild in the sea wind. Next to it was a faded envelope, addressed in firm handwriting, Major General Elaine Halberg, U.S. Army HQ. Hal had never opened the most recent one from her, mailed months ago. A holiday card, perhaps. Or news of another award. He opened it now. Inside was a note, brief and formal, yet unmistakably hers. Uncle Tom. I've been invited to speak at a memorial event next month in D.C. I want to mention you, your service, your sacrifices. I hope that's all right. I think it's time. With respect. Elaine. He hadn't responded. He hadn't known how. Now, in the flickering silence of a lonely kitchen, he reached for the phone. His fingers hovered above the receiver. It had been years since they'd spoken, real conversation, not awkward exchanges at funerals or holidays. He picked up the handset and dialed her number, which he still knew by heart. Voicemail. Elaine, it's Uncle Tom, he said after the beep. His voice cracked, not from age, but effort. I think I made a mistake wearing it today. The medal. I thought it might. I don't know. I'm not sure what I thought. He paused, hearing the hum of the line like distant static. Anyway. That's all. No need to call back. I just wanted to say that. He hung up and sat still for a long time. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere down the block, a child shouted, and a screen door slammed. He didn't move. The next day, he left the house only once, to return the gloves. Not for a refund, he simply placed them on the counter and walked away. The same cashier was there, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up. No apology, no acknowledgement. Hal didn't expect one. Not anymore. That night, his phone rang just past 8. He almost didn't answer. Then he saw the name, Elaine Halberg. His hand moved before he could second guess. Uncle Tom, her voice said on the other end. It was steadier than he remembered, deeper too. I got your message. He said nothing. You didn't make a mistake, she continued. Wearing the medal, I mean. They did. Every person who stood silent did. And that boy, she paused, choosing her words. He poked something he didn't understand. But I do. And I'm coming. You don't have to, Hal managed to say, voice hoarse. I do, she replied. Less than 12 hours later, she stood on his doorstep. Hal opened the door to find her in full dress uniform, hat under one arm, the silver stars gleaming beneath the porch light. Her presence filled the small space like a memory brought to life. Her eyes were soft, but resolute. You look like your mother, Hal said. Elaine smiled faintly. She'd say the same about you. She stepped inside without waiting to be asked. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one June had polished every Sunday. Hal poured tea again. This time, his hands barely shook. Elaine looked at him, her gaze direct. Why did you decide to wear it, finally? I don't know, he admitted. I guess. I thought it would mean something. For them. Not for me. It did, she said. Just not the way you hoped. He stared at the medal, still pinned to his blazer, though now slightly tarnished. I should have kept it in the drawer. No, she said. You should have worn it sooner. But now that you have, we're not putting it back. There was a pause. Come back with me, she said finally. To the store. Hal raised an eyebrow. Why? Because dignity doesn't whisper forever. Sometimes it has to be seen. He shook his head slowly. I don't want to cause trouble. You won't, she said. You'll remind them. Hal looked away, then back. For the first time in days, he nodded. The next morning, they returned, together. The morning light was sharp, unfiltered, and cold against the glass of Carson's department store. The air held that particular stillness that precedes confrontation, not loud, not hostile, but heavy with anticipation. Hal stood at the entrance, the automatic doors parted in welcome or warning. He wasn't sure which. He wore the same blazer. The metal had been carefully polished by Elaine that morning. It caught the sun now in steady pulses, steady as Hal's breath. He no longer trembled. Elaine stood beside him, her presence undeniable. The uniform fit her like command fit her voice, measured, proud, unwavering. Stars on her shoulders, ribbons neatly aligned, a crease in her trousers so sharp it looked like it could slice hesitation in half. Together they walked in, boots and loafers on tile, side by side. Customers drifted between shelves and displays. A Muzak version of a patriotic march played faintly overhead, unaware of the irony. Some glanced their way, double-taked at the uniform, and quickly moved aside. The same cashier from 2 days ago stood at the counter, arms folded, eyes distant with boredom. Elaine moved directly toward the front desk, the kind where returns are processed and complaints die in anonymity. Hal followed, silent but present, his back straightened like the ghosts behind him had reached up to lift his spine. A middle-aged assistant manager looked up, confused at first. Then her eyes locked on Elaine's stars, widened, and scrambled for composure. "Ma'am, General, can I help you?" "Yes," Elaine said, voice calm and deliberate. "I'm here to speak to the young man who insulted this veteran." She gestured to Hal without looking at him. 2 days ago. He flicked his silver star and called him a fraud. No one stopped him. No one corrected him. That's unacceptable. The manager flushed red. Let me, of course." She waved hastily to the cashier. "Dylan. Come here." The boy looked up, confused, and slowly made his way over. The moment he saw Hal and Elaine together, something in his face changed. His mouth parted slightly, words delayed. He wasn't smirking now. Elaine turned fully to face him. "Do you know who this man is?" The cashier looked at Hal, then away, then back. "No. I mean, I didn't know, he didn't say anything." "He didn't need to," Elaine said. "Because people like him, from his generation, often don't. But silence isn't a weakness. It's a burden. And when someone carries it long enough, they earn more than medals. They earn respect." The boy's eyes dropped. I thought he was just wearing it for show." "He wore it for Memorial Week," she said. "To remember friends who never came home. Men he carried out of frozen ravines under fire. He didn't do it for your approval. But he deserved your respect." The boy swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he said, eyes now squarely on Hal. "I didn't know." Hal nodded, slow and unreadable. "Most people don't," he said, voice like gravel smoothed by time. Elaine didn't press further. She turned to the assistant manager. "This store should have a protocol for how veterans are treated. And for how employees are trained to recognize the difference between stolen valor and actual service. You failed him." The manager looked properly chastised. "You're absolutely right." "I'm so sorry, sir," she said, this time to Hal. "We'll address this immediately. Please, let us make it right." Hal gave a half smile, small but enough. "I'm not here for right. I'm here to stand." Elaine turned to leave, and Hal followed. The customers who had quietly watched from behind racks and corners now stepped aside without being told. One older man saluted. A woman with a toddler touched her heart. No one looked away this time. Outside, the parking lot stretched sun-bleached and vast. Hal took a slow breath, as though the last few days were exhaled through his lungs all at once. Elaine stood beside him, neither triumphant nor proud, just steady. "Thank you," he said softly. "You thanked me the day you decided to put that medal on," she replied. The rest of this was just the echo. They returned to his house, where she insisted on staying for lunch. He made tomato soup from a can and grilled cheese with too much butter. They didn't talk about the store. They talked about June, about Danny, about Elaine's upcoming speech. Hal showed her the photos he'd kept, black and white snapshots of men frozen forever at 19 or 20, smiling despite everything. She listened, not with politeness, but with reverence. Before she left, she asked a final question. "Would you let me tell your story?" He hesitated. "Not sure it's a story." "It is," she said. "And people need to hear it." He nodded once. "Just, don't make me a hero. I buried a lot of better men." "I won't," she promised. "I'll just tell the truth." That night, Elaine returned to base. Hal sat by his window, tea steaming in his hands, the silver star beside him on the table, not hidden, not displayed, just there. Present. 2 days later, a letter arrived from Carson's. Apology, acknowledgement, and an invitation. They wanted to create something new. Something permanent. A space not for merchandise, but memory. A display to honor those who had worn valor quietly. Hal reread the letter twice. Then he picked up the phone. This time, he called them. And he said yes. The display began with a shadow box. Carson's department store cleared a space by the front entrance, an area once used for mannequin displays and seasonal deals. For weeks, the spot had stood empty, cordoned off with a velvet rope and a sign that read, "Coming Memorial Week, Quiet Valor." Few knew what to expect. Fewer still remembered the man who had left the store in silence only days prior. But when the exhibit was unveiled, there was no mistaking its message. At its center stood a wooden pedestal with glass walls, housing Thomas Halberg's silver star, perfectly polished, now mounted on a navy blue backdrop. Beneath it was a plaque with simple, deliberate words. For service rendered without need for witness. Thomas Halberg, U.S. Army Medic. Korea, 1951 inch. The plaque didn't mention his confrontation. It didn't need to. The display was not born from controversy but from clarity. What followed, what grew around that single star, was unexpected. Other veterans in the town stepped forward. Some brought medals, others brought letters, old uniforms, photographs sun-bleached and creased. Carson's transformed one corner of its store into a living archive of silent service. A bronze star from a nurse who served in Vietnam. A purple heart from a Desert Storm vet whose limp was as invisible to strangers as Hal's had once been. Each piece was framed with a quote, not always famous, but always personal. Hal hadn't expected to attend the unveiling. Elaine had gently suggested it. "They're not honoring you alone," she said. "They're honoring a part of all of us. But someone has to stand in the light first." He'd resisted, at first. But something about the way she looked at him, the same resolve he once saw in a mirror before charging into fire, nudged him toward yes. So he came. He wore his blazer again. No cane this time. The limp remained, but he carried it as one might carry a flag, worn, steady, unyielding. Elaine accompanied him, but stayed just behind as they entered. The store manager, nervous and reverent, greeted him at the entrance. She had memorized her notes, but when she met Hal's eyes, she folded them away. "Mr. Halberg," she said softly, "on behalf of all of us, we thank you. Not just for what you did then, but for reminding us now." Hal said little. A nod, a faint smile. But inside, something long buried felt seen. The ceremony wasn't long. A small podium had been wheeled out near the display, where a local high school quartet played a rendition of "Taps" that trembled at the edges. A history teacher spoke briefly about the Korean War, about how often it was overshadowed by louder, longer conflicts. Then Elaine stepped forward. She didn't speak as a general. She spoke as a niece. "My uncle never asked to be remembered," she began. "He didn't wear his medal for glory. He wore it for the ones who couldn't. For the men whose last breaths he carried in his arms. For the silence that followed them home." Her words carried over the still crowd like smoke rising from a long-buried fire. He was mocked in this very building. But he chose not to strike back. He chose to stand. And in doing so, he reminded us that real valor doesn't demand applause, it only asks not to be erased. There was no applause at first. Only stillness. The kind that knows when to listen. Then, slowly, people began to step forward, one by one. A middle-aged man in a postal uniform approached Hal. "My dad served in Korea. Never talked about it. He passed last year. I think he would have liked this." A young woman with dark eyes and a military haircut offered a quiet, "Thank you, sir." Then came 3 teenagers in school jackets, students from the same school Hal had worked at for nearly 30 years. One of them, tall, awkward, with ink stains on his fingers, held out his hand. "We never knew," he said. Hal looked at him. He thought about the years spent unseen, the halls swept without comment, the medals hidden away in drawers while the world kept spinning forward. He took the boy's hand. "Now you do," he said. That night, the store kept the lights on an extra hour. Customers lingered at the display, reading each plaque, peering into the shadow boxes like windows into someone else's memory. No one shouted. No one scoffed. The silver star stayed where it belonged, in light, not silence. Word of the exhibit spread. A regional newspaper ran a story under the headline, "Quiet Valor, One Veteran's Medal Sparks Community Remembrance." The article featured a photo of Hal beside Elaine, both looking off to the display. The caption read, "Legacy is not what we leave behind, it's what we allow to be remembered." Hal read it once, then folded it and tucked it behind the photo of June and Danny on his bookshelf. He didn't show it off. But he didn't hide it either. In the weeks that followed, the exhibit became permanent. Not large. Not grand. But steady. Carson's even added a small bench nearby, with a sign encouraging people to sit. Reflect. Remember. Hal visited once more, quietly, a week later. No uniform. No announcement. He stood before the display, looked into the glass, and placed a folded paper next to his own plaque. Inside was a note, handwritten in unsteady script. "To those I left behind. I remembered. Now they do too. Th." He didn't wait for anyone to see him do it. He simply walked out into the fading sun. The bench near the Quiet Valor display became more than a place to rest. It became a station of memory. Veterans sat with distant eyes. Children sat cross-legged, asking their grandparents quiet questions. Shoppers paused, less hurried than before. It began with Hal's silver star in the glass case, but it didn't end there. Weeks after the unveiling, Carson's added a second display, then a third. Letters came in from local veterans. Some brought medals, others brought photographs folded in wallets for 50 years. Carson's partnered with nearby schools to create a tribute wall where students wrote notes on cards shaped like stars. "Thank you for carrying others," one read. Another, "We see you now." Hal attended the second display's opening. This time, people greeted him softly, with recognition, not just of who he was, but what he represented. He stood beside Elaine, accepting handshakes and nods from men and women who saw themselves reflected in the quiet way he carried his story. Elaine visited regularly. Their conversations became comfortable. She brought old photos, of her father, of herself as a child on Hal's shoulders, of June smiling beside a river. One day, over tea, she asked, "Do you regret staying silent for so long?" Hal sipped slowly, eyes on the window. "No. I regret thinking silence had to last forever." They began appearing together at schools. Elaine spoke at the podium. Hal stood beside her, saying only a few words, but none were wasted. After one talk, a student asked Hal, "Why didn't you ever tell your story?" He answered, "Because I thought silence was respect. I didn't realize that sharing could be, too." That quote found its way into classrooms, pinned to corkboards, written in yearbooks. Silence can be respect, but sharing can be, too. Teachers read it aloud on Veterans Day. Elaine contacted a local filmmaker. A short documentary was produced, The One Who Stood Still. It was honest, gentle, without grandeur. Hal sat in his armchair, speaking plainly about his service, about Mendez and Wilcox and Danny. When asked about the Silver Star, he said, "It felt heavy at the time. Still does. But not because of what it weighs." The film aired on Memorial Day. Letters arrived by the dozen, then the 100. Veterans wrote to say they'd finally opened drawers, dusted off medals. One woman said her father cried after watching. He never spoke about the war. Now he's telling stories. Hal read each one. His hands shook more now, but he still wrote replies. One morning, a call came from Washington, D.C. The Veterans Affairs Office wanted to honor him with a national citation for lifelong contribution to public memory. The ceremony would be at the National Veterans Memorial. They asked Elaine to introduce him. Hal didn't answer right away. After the call, he stood at his kitchen sink, watching sparrows land on the fence. Finally, he told Elaine, "I'll go. Not for the medal. For the one still waiting to be heard." The memorial was dignified and still. Rows of veterans, some in wheelchairs, others with canes, sat quietly in the sun. Elaine stood at the podium in dress uniform. We think of valor as loud, fast, brave. But some men carry it differently. My uncle carried it through silence, through years of service no one saw. And when he finally stood, he reminded all of us that even quiet strength deserves to be heard. When Hal was introduced, the crowd rose. He walked slowly, leaning slightly, the silver star pinned firm and shining. He didn't speak long. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I just didn't leave people behind. And now I know I haven't been left behind either." The audience remained standing. The silence after his words said more than any ovation could. After the ceremony, a young boy in a tiny army jacket approached. He handed Hal a drawing, stick figures under a sky, one large star above them all. "That one's you," he said. Hal smiled. "Thank you," he whispered. Back home, he pinned the drawing to his fridge, right beside a faded photo of June and the folded flag that had arrived with Danny's body. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. A few weeks later, Hal didn't come to the bench. The quiet valor exhibit remained. The staff polished the glass every morning. Veterans still brought keepsakes. Children still asked questions. Elaine came alone now. She'd sit quietly for an hour, sometimes longer. One day, she brought a new plaque and placed it above the silver star. It read, "He reminded us how to stand. Even when sitting. Even when silent." And beneath it, etched in smaller letters, were Hal's final recorded words from the film. "Now they do too." Legacy heard.